In a world where there are lots of animals, big and small, there are some animals not often thought about in the public consciousness. When people think of bats, they often think of images in films and TV shows. But many of us know little about the secret life of a bat. They are small mammals with wide wings and lots of secrets to tell. There are 17 breeding bat species in the country. All of them are endangered and protected, and a few species are in grave danger of becoming extinct. But there are small groups of bat fans dotted around the country trying to help protect them and preserve them in their habitats.
I'm Caroline Dufresne. I'm here at a garden pond in the New Forest to help get rid of some of the misconceptions people have about bats.
Someone with a keen interest in observing bats is Ian Baker, a pioneer in the development of the infrared camera. Through his work, he has helped enable us to see in the dark, so we can watch these furry little creatures and observe their behaviour.
By background, I'm a physicist, and for the last 40 years I've been working in research and development of infrared detectors and infrared cameras. And currently I work for a company called Leonardo UK that make the top-end infrared cameras. So I get the pleasure of borrowing these cameras to use for wildlife photography. There are two types of infrared cameras. One we call active infrared cameras, which actually use an illuminator, and they tend to be like conventional cameras, only short range. And there's passive infrared cameras, such as this one, which detect the infrared energy that every body around us emits. I'm emitting 200 watts of infrared energy. There's an enormous amount of infrared energy around. So these passive infrared cameras are detecting the heat from objects. This one is one of the lower cost ones, and this just detects the actual heat, and it uses a very powerful optic, but this is very short range. So this type of camera would only work over, say, 5 meters or so. For filming wildlife, we need to do something slightly different, and we need to cool the infrared detector down to liquid air temperatures, and then we can operate over much longer ranges to film wildlife. And those are the cameras that my company makes, including those that are used on nature documentary programs like Springwatch and Planet Earth, which reveal behaviour that had never been seen before. So for things like bats' behaviour, their feeding behaviour, their socialising behaviour, all things that have never been seen before, and that fascinated me to be able to combine those two subjects. Cameras to be able to film them flying very fast, and it was ending up being quite a specialised activity. And so when the BBC had a programme specifically on bats, they asked me to do all the filming because of that knowledge I had about the cameras. And that got me interested in bats because I began to see things about bats that didn't look right. The textbooks say they should have hot wings and cold bodies. They're covered in very dense fur, they should look cold. In fact, they had cold wings and very hot bodies, which was totally wrong. And when I looked at it, I thought, wow, there's new science here, because that's totally wrong. That made me fascinated about the physiology of animals in general. It applies to rodents and shrews as well. And it turns out that there's a completely new thermoregulation mechanism there. We don't really understand it yet, but we found a completely new thermoregulation mechanism using thermal cameras. The surprising thing I found about bats is just how little we understand about what they do. I left a camera staring at a cubic metre of air above a pond for 3 hours, and I managed to get 3 instances of a bat catching a midge. and we have no idea how it senses that midge and how it catches it. But on film, what it appeared is that the bat aimed for it and then at the last minute flicked up its tail, caught the midge in its tail, and then did a crunch, ate the midge and flew on. And all that happened in 0.1 of a second. So we understand very little about how these animals operate.
All bats eat insects, but just like humans, they have their favourite tastes. Most insects are caught and eaten in mid-air, though bats sometimes find it easier to hang up and eat larger prey. Flying uses up lots of energy, so bats have big appetites. A common pipistrelle can eat over 3,000 tiny insects in a single night. Dispelling the myths, bats are not blind, but at night their ears are more important than their eyes. So as they fly along, they actually make shouting sounds to communicate to one another. The returning echoes give the bats information about anything that is ahead of them, including the size and shape of an insect and which way it is going. This impressive system of finding prey is called echolocation, locating things by their echoes. Lena Griffiths is a keen bat carer and has been devoted to caring for distressed and injured bats.
Some neighbours were going out one evening, 8 years ago now, and they had what looked like a fish tank in their arms. So I asked them where they were going with a fish tank on a summer's evening. And they said, "Oh no, it's a bat. Do you want to see?" So I had a look and it was love at first sight. I've been doing it ever since. Well, some of them are injured because man, in his wisdom, is destroying their habitat. Say they're pulling a roof off or something and they didn't know bats were there. And the bat will be damaged. The worst thing, I think, is they're catted. Cats love bats to play with, and of course cats are cruel. So they do play with them. Once they've ripped the membranes in the wing, the bat can't fly, the cat can have fun. So we get a lot of catted bats. I had 11 last weekend. I've got 4 now, because 2 have been released, 2 have been put to sleep, 2 have gone to another carer. So you get a notification from the Bat Conservation Trust or Hampshire Bat Group to say there is a bat in trouble somewhere. It will either say catted bat or injured bat or grounded bat. So one of us will go along. For me, on this side of the New Forest, it's usually me that goes out, because there's only me here. You pick up the bat wearing your gloves, all sorts of gloves we have for different size bats. It has to be in an escape-proof box. If you can get a pencil through a hole, a bat can get through it. A soprano pip can get through it. We often get called to places and the bat has gone. So you pick up the bat, you bring it home, you want to weigh it, have a look at its wings, give it some rehydration fluid, usually with a paintbrush or a pipette, and then leave it to rest. Then have a really good look at it. Look at its wings, look underneath, look for any cuts, blood, look at its feces, look at its urine, look at its teeth if you can, and then make a decision on what happens next. If it's being catted, as we call it, if it's been damaged by a cat, it will always have antibiotics and painkillers. We have a lot of them.
Only registered bat carers are legally allowed to keep bats in captivity, but only if they plan to return them back into the wild once the bat is considered fit for release. Once the bat has been assessed for injuries, it is important to sex the individual. If it's the breeding season and is a female bat, it could potentially be pregnant or have a pup hidden somewhere nearby to where it was found. The species of the bat is also vital to identify. If the bat is a lesser or greater horseshoe, these species have very special requirements for housing and handling. They cannot crawl around like other bats. Once the bat has been assessed, it is given rehydration fluid using a syringe. Feeding the bat when it comes into care is also vital. Sometimes an individual will be too weak to munch through a mealworm, So it is important that you kill the mealworm and feed the bat the guts so that the bat can get the nutrition it needs. A harp trap provides an alternative bat survey method to mist netting or the use of bat detectors. They are particularly useful in situations where bats in flight can be channeled through a natural funnel, such as above a watercourse, a cave, or mine entrance. They catch flying bats without damaging their wings. They consist of a frame that supports 2 rows of fine thread and a catching bag at the base. If a bat detects the first row and swerves to pass through, it collides with the second row and tumbles into the collecting bag. Conservationists Paul and Colleen Hope have also become devoted to bats. Through their work, they survey, record and catalogue bats, looking at species, numbers and location. They advocate the bats' interests and help protect them.
In conjunction with our acoustic lure, and the acoustic lure would be mounted, a little ultrasound speaker is mounted on a pole, kind of roughly about here, and then we play bat social calls which then attract bats into the net from one side or the other. So that's how the system works in theory. You've got to use it really in woodland, so if you've got woodland rides, fairly dense woodland rides, it's really useful. And also, as we said, at hibernation sites where you're going to catch large numbers of bats, maybe you've got a smallish cave entrance or a tunnel, something like that, and you can set it in front.
But also, we've used these. We survey barns, are really sometimes quite difficult to survey big traditional timber frame barns, and you can get a lot of bats in the gaps around the mortise joints in the frames. They're very sensitive, so sometimes if you got a nice tree hole and you think you'll put a hand net underneath it, you could be on hiding to nothing because it's very sensitive disturbance. So these are useful.
When we track bats using radio telemetry, we have to fix these tags on. So this is a radio transmitter tag that you would glue to the back of a bat, and that would allow you to track the bat. The batteries on them vary, so that's the battery on the end there, and obviously the long antenna runs down the back and past the edge of the tail membrane of the bat. And different tags will have different lifespans, so anything from a couple of weeks to maybe even more than a month if you have a larger battery.
It's easiest to see bats in the warmer months of the year. As autumn draws closer, bats aim to build up fat reserves and search for hibernation sites. And hibernation begins around November for the winter months. Working with animals can be fulfilling and rewarding and therapeutic. It's good to give something back. And bats, when they are injured, vulnerable or orphaned, need to be cared for too. If you would like to know more about bats, creating suitable habitats, becoming a bat surveyor or carer, please contact your local bat group. I hope this documentary has piqued your interest in bats, and you'll continue to take an interest in them and their well-being.